All right, I'm going to get started and then people
Okay.
can trickle in as we go. But I wanted to talk today a little bit about just investing strategies with we get a ton of inquiries about our clients wanting to invest in real estate. What is the BRRRR method? What does the process look like? How do you do it? How do you advise a client? And, you know, I think whether you're new or you've been in the business a while, real estate investing is something that's become incredibly trendy. It's this quote unquote passive income stream opportunity for people to kind of get out of the rat race, right? Everybody tells a story. These guys that are worth 50, 100 billions of dollars say, oh man, in 2015, I quit my corporate job because I was cash flowing this much this much income, and this is how I did it, and this is how we got there, and here's how you do it. And candidly, guys, oftentimes it's not like that. And so we're getting our clients now that come to us to ask the question, how do I do it? I want to do it. What do I need? And how do I get there? So I figured it'd be helpful today to jump on here and talk a little bit about it, what I found to be successful for me, and then how I advise and help my clients as well. So the BRRRR method: buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat, over and over and over again, right? So we'll start out and we'll talk about the buying process. How do you advise clients to do it? When you refinance, when you do the process, what does it all look like? So one of the things that I think often where people get in over their head when buying real estate and trying to do this is they don't understand how to identify good quality deals. That's the most important thing. I mean, one of the most important things you can do when buying real estate is buying either at or below market value, which has been incredibly challenging to do. Gosh, over the last 3 years, 5 years, however far back you want to go. And I would say that identifying those good deals aren't just identified based on what the house is worth versus what it can rent for, but it also has to do with your market knowledge of a neighborhood, the proximity of where you live. If you're buying houses in Toledo, Ohio, and you don't have resources to manage them, they could be great deals, they could be bad deals. You won't know until you go and visit, or if you have a property manager that goes and does it for you. And so understanding those things, like for me, I only buy properties in a certain wheelhouse that I work, live, and know consistently. So it hedges the risk and it mitigates some of the challenges that come with owning a property, such as getting phone calls at 7 p.m. to a flooded basement in an area that I'm close by. I can go, as a real estate professional, I can go identify what the issue is and then align my own contractors to do the work, right? It's easier when you're close by, or it's easier when your properties are all in a similar area based on geographic neighborhoods, things like that. The other thing I would say, if there's something in an area that you believe in, there's certain neighborhoods that like Daniel is huge on. And so right now, as I'm trying to expand my real estate portfolio, I'll see a house in maybe a neighborhood that I would have never invested, say, aren't you big on this? What do you think about this? Why is this growing? Why should I buy this house? Or why would this be a good investment for this investor that we have? And we can leverage those things. So Daniel, if you want to talk about that real quick, just provide some information, that'd be great.
Yeah. So when I met Alex, he really was preaching that, hey, if you're going to do this investment game, you should really do it where you know and where you're confident. And that was Broad Ripple. So that was where I was focusing a lot of my time. Well, at the end of the day, we have investor clients who want outside of Broad Ripple, they want other spots. And so you kind of have to the light will go off. Okay, I think this is a good spot and here's why. And typically my light goes off when I see business investors, especially local business investors, putting money into a neighborhood. So if you see a coffee house pop up in an area, it's wow, I can't believe that coffee house is there. Or for example, Can movie theater down in Brookside. When you see that stuff happen, and then you look down the street and you're all right, there's a duplex that's being renovated there. There's another single family being renovated there. If you're looking at the prices and you're these seem like way too good of values, there's a chance that that's where you should be parking some money, because eventually you're betting on the neighborhood to come up, and you're not the only one betting on it. you're side by side with other investors, with other business owners in the area to do that. And so while I think South Broad Ripple is like the spot to do it right now, especially on the east side of South Broad Ripple, there are other opportunities over by where the new soccer stadium is going to go in, or on the near east side by like the Little Flower Brookside area. And I think it's important for us as guides to our investor clients to be able to highlight some of these other areas that we may not have our money in, but like this is probably a good spot for you to start at least looking.
Yeah. Tons of good value provided there. Good points. I think the idea, like, if you look at one thing that I always used as a measure was metropolitan Indianapolis, you're always like a couple blocks away from trouble, or you're a couple blocks away from $1 million property. And that's something that as an investor, if you look, like I've always used to gauge when I use past sales in a better area, I look at a fringe area that I think is relative, you know, if it's a couple blocks away, if it's half a mile, that's not far enough that it won't, the gentrification of in Indianapolis will not push through there. So let's continue the conversation of like Broad Ripple, or, you know, Daniel, you said the Near East Side. In Broad Ripple, every time they put a restaurant in, you can watch what the sale prices will do from north to south. North, people used to focus in Broad Ripple buying, I would say, north of Kessler to Broad Ripple Avenue, in between Keystone and College. And then it went down to 54th Street. And then if you were south of 54th Street, you were in a marginal area. Then affordability got a little bit out of control. So people started buying South 54th Street down to 49th. And then if you lived South 49th Street, it was not a place that you wanted to live. And people made you feel that way. But if you looked, like Daniel said, at what an investor would do, or where a bar or a restaurant popped up, you could look and say, well, that's interesting. That 2-bed, 1-bath sold for this much money at 49th and Ralston. I've got to believe that at 48th in Ralston or 46th in Norwaldo, that is a comparable deal. And it may not be a good deal now, but if I'm buying these properties to buy and hold, which is what you're doing with these strategies, you're buying it and you're investing and you're playing the long game. So in 3 to 5 years, will those 5 blocks really matter? And I think what the market data has showed us based on some of these neighborhoods is it really doesn't. If you're buying for the long term and you hold your properties, you may not get the return that you want immediately, but 2, 3, 5 years from now, as you pass through one tenant or 2 tenants in your property, you look at an opportunity to say, if in fact I did need to sell my home, my market value, the appreciation that I would get would be far substantial than you could park the money in the stock market or oftentimes in other forms of investing. So that's something I always used. The way that the market provides the data is something that can give you that information rather quickly. The other thing I look at, I think, as a society, cultural trails, physical fitness, like parks. I used to visit Denver. They have huge parks all over the place, and their real estate prices are quite bananas. People want to live by the parks and they want to live by walkable stuff, right? So I've bought a lot of my stuff near the Monon Trail, and now I'm buying stuff near the Nickel Plate, or I'm buying in places that you can walk to a place that has desirable coffee shops, restaurants, you know, the garage downtown, things like that.
Alex,
So
let me back there real fast, just quickly.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the Nickel Plate Trail, and if you've been reading in the news in the last couple of years, it's definitely taking time. The Nickel Plate runs from Fishers. Well, it doesn't make it to really Indianapolis proper. And now they're taking this railroad tracks that runs like north-south at an angle, almost like east-west also once it gets to Broad Ripple. And they're taking that railroad track and they're gonna tie it into the Nickel Plate. And what's good about that is it's gonna go down across 46th Street to the State Fairgrounds. Well, that side of Broad Ripple has never been all that desirable, but you're seeing the 46th Street corridor blowing up. You're seeing the houses down by the fairgrounds blowing up. And if this Nickel Plate Trail does eventually make that way through there, it's going to be another Monon-esque thing where people want to be around it. And there's going to be more development. It's just kind of keeping your finger on the pulse of stuff like that coming through like our neighborhoods.
Yeah. So look, that is a different strategy buying in those types of areas than it is. There are some people that when they purchase, they'll go to brand new construction and they'll purchase and they'll say, hey, in the last handful of years, I got a 3% interest rate on a brand new house and I don't need to pay maintenance costs and things like that. That stuff's all fine. And that's not how I've done things. Some people do it and they have a ton of success with it. The maintenance costs that you put into these older homes, a lot of people question, man, I don't want to maintain older stuff. Guys, if you look at our young professionals or put yourself in the shoes of a tenant, where would you want to live if you were 22 to 30 years old, couldn't afford a house, but you wanted the social life? Where would you want to live? I've always thought, and I've always lived in the city. So I buy my properties based on where people want to live, because then I can control and drive the rent and get rent premiums for the tenants. Does that make sense? So there are people that will go to suburbs and they will buy properties and say, well, I have a 4% interest rate on this. It's 3 beds, 2 baths. It's in a good school system. Okay, you're going to rent the property to that person. The question that you need to ask is, are you renting to a family? Why are they renting versus owning? Are you getting into the idea of renting to somebody with damaged credit or struggling payment history? And is that the type of quality tenant that you want to do? Some people will go into school systems and focus on that. I think I have 2 kids. Kids are like pets. They will make a mess of your property just like a pet will. Should you allow pets or not? That's something I could touch on later if you have questions about that. But that's the type of stuff that you need to look at. So when we talk about how do you vet tenants and how do you look at those things when you're looking to rent a property, how do you do it? I use Zillow. They have a great platform. I post my rentals on Zillow. I put them on there. It's $30. You get 30 days of premium marketing space. If you search for rental history on Zillow, you can find everything that you need. I make my people that are requesting to see the property fill out an application. It costs them $29. I don't see any of that money. It goes to Zillow. They take it. Of course they do. And then they send me a credit report and a payment history and income history on those potential tenants. You can determine who you're renting your property to. It makes it very easy for a landlord. So if you have a client that says, who helps me manage my property? Well, you can pay property management. Property management often takes first month's rent and 10% a month. That shakes out to like 14 to 15% of your total net income. And oftentimes, guys, especially right now, when you look at what interest rates are, that takes your margin down too lean to make the property worth any value. So if you're buying these, here are the things that you need to focus on. You need to focus on your cash flow. How much inbound cash are you making from the property? You need to focus on your cash on cash return. How long will it take you to get your cash back? So if I have to invest $50,000 into the property, how long is it going to take me to get my cash back? So I can do it again and again and again. And so pivoting on that, when you look at the BRRRR strategy, buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat, you purchase property and you put up your down payment, then you rehab the property. So let's just use $100,000 property, for example. Okay. You purchase the property for $100,000 on a mortgage. Okay. And the bank makes you put 20% down. We're just going to use round numbers and I'm going to talk through this. So I'm going to make notes as I go so it's easy for everyone to follow. That's $20,000 cash. Okay. I then remodel it and I put $50,000 in it. It needs a kitchen, a bath, some paint, an HVAC, whatever, 50 grand. I'm now in this property, $70,000 cash. Okay. I've got a mortgage on the $100,000 purchase I made. So an $80,000 mortgage. I can now rent it. $100,000 mortgage, $100,000 purchase with an $80,000 mortgage. Let's just say that number's $700. Today's world, $700. Let's say I can get rent in that current situation, after I've put all that money in it of 13, let's say, let's use $1,500 because that's likely realistic because you've made major improvements. It's really nice. Got a great desirable property in a hot neighborhood. Let's say you're going to get $1,500 a month. You can leave your $80,000 mortgage balance and your $700 a month payment, and your cash flow would be $800 a month, less your operating expenses and less any vacancies. Does that make sense? Does anybody have questions how I got that? Then you can run your operation like that. And you could say, I make $800 a month, roughly $800 a month divided by my $70,000 investment. $800. That's $9,600 a year divided by my $70,000 investment. That's a cash on cash return of 13.7%. Okay. You can't get that return in a traditional stock market deal. Okay. However, what I would suggest you do is do a refinance on the property when you hit the 6-month period of ownership. If you take a mortgage and you invest money into a property, they advise you not to refinance the property for a 6-month seasoning period. During that seasoning period, you fix it up, you put a tenant in. Let's say at that point, your improvements say your property is worth $200,000. Okay. What the bank's going to say is we have to pay off your existing mortgage. So you have a $200,000 value now. You got to have 25% down, which is $50,000. And then they're going to pay off your existing mortgage. Okay. So 50,000, and then your existing mortgage was 80,000. You guys following me? You have, those two things are paid off. And what do you have left? $70,000. What did you put in your property to start? $70,000. What is your cash on cash return now? It's infinity. You have all your money back. You own your property with zero money in it because the bank has now given you everything back, and you have, that is tax-free income. You now own the home with no money in the property. It's now improved. And those $50,000 that you invested into the property are tax write-offs against your income. And now you have a new mortgage balance. Your mortgage balance is going to be $150,000. So $200,000 less your $150,000 investment, less your 25% down. So your $50,000, $150,000 mortgage balance. Let's say your payment is now, that payment should be like $1,350. That seems about right with 2% taxes, insurance, everything. You make $150 a month on your property. So your cash flow has shrunk down, but your cash on cash return is infinity. And if you're trying to get started, the faster you can get your cash back, you can now take your initial investment and put it back into the property and do it over and over and over and over again. So the question becomes, why do you invest money into the property? How far do you go? What things do you do? From experience, you can have nice properties that you rent, or you can make improvements to properties, or you can try to be a slumlord. I tried to be a slumlord one time in a duplex. My phone never stopped ringing with the leaks, the electrical stuff, the flooding in the basement, the leaks. At one point, I got a phone call that said, Alex, when I take a shower, it rains in the kitchen. Okay. I had to put the tenant in a hotel for 7 days. That cost me 1 month's rent from them because of what it cost to put them in a hotel. And then I had to pay $10,000 to have a bathroom redone in 7 days. There was no really other alternative to fix the plan because it was a 1-bathroom house. So then the question becomes, is the juice worth the squeeze? Do you do the work? Do you not? I'm a believer to leverage the tax laws, right? Like if you're investing money into your investments, it's a deduction against the income that you generate. So let's say you now own a ton of properties and your income's $100,000. If you put $30,000 of repairs into a property, your income is now $70,000. You pay less taxes on 70,000 than you do 100, but the repairs that you make improve your property, which increases your rent, which increases the longevity of the stability of the property, right? So while we have to think like an investor in how we do this, we should be thinking like real estate professionals, like we would advise our clients while they're owning a home, right? Do you need to fix the leak? Yeah, you can bandage it with Billy's Leak Fix or in Flex Seal, or you can call a plumber and have somebody come out who's a professional and have the resources to do things the right way. Does that all make sense, guys? Those numbers things, it's easy to get lost in them. It's very confusing, but the education behind it, it's when you hear people say, I bought a property with none of my own money, that's one of the ways people do it. So I'm going to give you guys a couple other basic strategies that you'll see. You may get a client that calls Daniel, and I hear this a ton. Oh man, I'm trying to hit the 1% rule. People want to take 1% of the purchase price and they want that to be what the monthly rent is. It's gotten pretty tough to find that in the market right now. And again, oftentimes, if you can find it, what you'll see on some of the investor hubs and online things like that, they'll say things like, classic 1%er, it'll be a duplex that you can buy for $110,000. It'll rent for $650 a side, and it's in an area that you probably don't want to go. So those are the things that you need to be looking for. It's not always just about the numbers, but it's oftentimes also about, hey, if you need to go show this house to a tenant, do you feel comfortable going up to that house? So I think when I'm buying investment properties, I want to buy investment properties where I would sell them to my client as well. You don't have to live there, but would you sell your client that house? If you had to go do a showing there, would you feel comfortable? Those things matter a ton. Who has questions or anything right now? Otherwise, I can keep moving along.
Alex, can you speak on like say you have a client who, a first-time investor. We have one right now with Nicholas. Got only a certain amount of cash. What would you recommend to him to either, his dollar amount's only going to give him something in an area that might be less desirable?
Yep.
What are some options he might have?
Yeah, so everybody gets really excited about this multifamily concept. It's a sexy conversation. People feel like you can get two houses for the price of one. The reality with multifamily is you have two massive headaches oftentimes. You have one roof, but you have so many windows in the property because there's two living quarters on each side. You have two furnaces, two HVACs, two kitchens, two water heaters, two washers and dryers, two of everything. So if your budget is tight, what I would advise you to do, I would buy a small single family house. Here's why. Single family is always desirable for a couple of reasons. The people that are coming to rent single family houses oftentimes want to get out of apartment style living, or they may rent a condo. They don't want the shared walls. They want a little more privacy. The other thing is, and I mentioned it earlier, everybody has pets now. Everybody has pets. So if you have a single family house, you may have a little bit of yard that becomes attractive to a tenant that will pay more money to rent the property. So what I've noticed is if I look at my door rent, I get way more for small single family houses. I see your comment and I'll get on that next. I see far higher rent in small single family. Here's the other side of it. In addition to the fact that there's only one of everything, in the instance you hate this or this is not for you, it's very easy to stick a sign in the yard and sell a single family house right now. It's easy to sell duplexes, but it's even easier to sell single family houses. The maintenance is easier, it's smaller, it's less of a risk. So for somebody like him, I would say find a decent area wring the rag on as much money as you can with a little bit of cash reserve and buy a small single family house that you could get a good tenant in that may not require a ton of work for you. That's how I would do that if you're financially tight, because one of his benefits that some of us don't have, he's very young. I think he's 22. So for him, he needs to look at this and say, if I'm going to own property for 30 to 40 years, which you should, if you're doing this, he can get started now. And that will be the catalyst to get his whole deal going. Is that helpful, Daniel?
Yeah, helpful. I think we had talked about another option for him would be potentially leveraging relationships with his parents, but that's another conversation.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you can get money where you can, if it doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah.
You know, the conversation about house hacking. The first house I ever bought, there's different sorts of it. Mia, you had asked, what about living in a duplex and renting the other? That's all a fantastic way to do it. The first duplex I ever bought, first home I ever bought was a duplex. I lived in half. My mortgage was $1,600. I got $1,600 in rent from the other side. So every single month I started at a net zero when everybody else had to pay to live. And what then I could do is I could hold back extra money to maintain the property because I didn't have a rent payment anymore and I didn't have a living expense. And I could make improvements if I needed to, or I could set money aside to eventually buy the next property that I wanted to own. So it allowed me to save a lot of money on that front. That's a great way to do it. There's also other house hacking ideas where people will rent out bedrooms. My physical therapist, he was renting like a traditional Fisher's house to the point where he had every bedroom rented on Airbnb, so much so that he had a air mattress in an office for rent for $30 a month or $30 a night, and he was constantly full. That's crazy. I'm probably not doing that. I think that's a little probably where I draw a line. But the house hacking thing where you can rent rooms in your house or quarters in your house, that's a great way to help supplement some income and cover some of your living expenses. The other thing I've seen people do, they'll do like short-term or like medium-term rentals. Well, where they'll put like a bedroom and a bathroom and a basement with an exterior entry door to the back, through the back, so it's not like super intrusive through your house. And they'll do like medium-term rentals to people like travel nurses or folks that are doing a construction on their house, and maybe they'll live in a small quarter of your house. You don't see them a ton, and it helps, and you can charge pretty nice premiums for things like that. Those are other decent options. It's an extension of the Airbnb, opposed to just turning over a rental every single night. Who has questions otherwise? Carrying on. I have questions on here like, how do you know if you use property management? Do I use property management? Is property management good? Is it worth it? I touched on it earlier. They charge a lot of money for oftentimes. So here's what I've always noticed. Go show a property to your client that's a rental. What are you going to say? You can tell it's a rental. This was a rental. How can I tell? I can look at a furnace filter. I can look at smoke alarms. I can look at light bulbs. Oftentimes with property management, and this isn't for about every property management, but it's a common theme. Landlords tend to be, through property managers, they're slumlords. They don't want to pay. And so every tenant that comes to me says the same thing. They treat me poorly. They don't respond to my request. I've had a leak in the ceiling for 2 weeks and nobody will call me back. And I've just had enough and I'm ready to move. So what I look at from our perspective and how do we advise our clients, this is a bit of a challenge here. I do my own property management because I know that nobody will care for my properties more than I will. And if these are going to be the biggest investments of my life and how they're going to create wealth strategies for my wife and my children, I'm going to care for them. And if it means I got to give it a little bit of extra attention, I'm going to do that. And so the idea of passive real estate income, it doesn't really exist for me. My wife and I own 16 rental doors. I bet I get a phone call maybe once a week. It's extra work, But here's what I know. When my tenant moves out, there's hardly ever any surprises. And if there are surprises, they're not really surprises because you know they're coming. So if you guys noticed, I had posted something on Instagram like, I don't know, 6 weeks ago about a house that was trashed. I knew that was coming. I didn't know how much it would cost a little more than I'd thought, but I've remedied every issue in that house and I've rented it to a good tenant. It'll never happen again. So it's like, well, cost of doing business, hard lesson to learn, but well worth it. Would a property manager have stopped that? No, they wouldn't have. They probably would have evicted the tenant sooner. It wouldn't have really done anything. Just moved my problem forward a little bit. The other thing that I think we all as real estate professionals have that the traditional investor doesn't is a Rolodex of contractors and resources for any real estate investor that we come across, right? So when they say like, Alex, what happens if there's a leak? What do? I tell my clients, just text me. I have resources that you can share. Call this guy, call that guy, call this guy, call that guy. And it helps them through the process of their ownership. So they can keep the extra money in their pocket by not paying a property manager currently. And then they can utilize our resources just like any of our clients should be able to do while they're owning a property anyway. So if Thanos sells a house to a client who's going to live there with his kids and they say, hey, I want to redo a kitchen, he's going to say, call these companies. Here's 2 referrals for you. Oh, you have a leak? Call this plumber. Sewer lines backed up? Call this guy. That's what we should do for people that are trying to own real estate. There are 2 different avenues on the property management front. There's like the super passive ones that do very little. There's a company in town, I think they charge $50 a month and they rent your property for like $700. They make the vetting process very challenging to get a tenant, so your vacancies are increased. Well, that cuts into your income. So while you think they're doing you a huge favor and they're not charging you a ton of money up front, they're taking it by not getting your property rented. And they're saying, hey, well, we're vetting for a quality tenant. That's so you don't have to work that hard. I can do that. You can do that. I can look at a credit report and say, this guy has 650 credit. He has a 92% payment history. You seem like a good enough person. I'll rent to you. Oh, you have a 400 credit score? No, right? Like, just be logical with it, right? Like, if you can look at that information, you can help your clients make that information. And the stuff on Zillow is for anybody and everybody to use. So if you need to know, like, how do I find rental history of how much I should charge or how much people are getting in the area, you can look and see. Who has other questions?
Quick question for you, Alex. When it in regards to rentals, I know there's a lot of rules and regulations on, you have to do certain minimums for your tenants. Like with HVAC, like when you buy a rental property, do you need to right away go in and put an air conditioner in if it's just window unit style cooling? Like what's the best advice on that?
So what I've noticed, I'll answer the question and then I'll pivot the question a little bit. So air conditioning is a luxury. It's not a necessity. If it's not in a house, you don't need to put it in. You need hot water, you need heat, you need 4 walls and a roof and things like that. If the tenant lived in the property with the landlord before and then you bought the house, they may have problems with that structure, but they likely do not, because there's a strong likelihood they're paying relative to what they're getting, is what I've noticed. What I would do is I would go and put an air conditioning unit in to improve the property for the tenant to say, hey, look, do you find value in a real air conditioning unit that cools your whole house? Well, yeah. Awesome. What are you paying in rent? $900. I need you to pay $1,300 and I'll put a new air conditioner in tomorrow. Deal. So now I pay $3,000 and put an air conditioner in, I cash flow an additional $400 a month. I get the write-off for the air conditioner, and I get $400, $300 a month in additional income that I can then hold back to make the next improvement for the property. So immediately that tenant has loyalty to you to say, wow, Alex, the last landlord treated me poorly. I can't believe you just did that for me. What else needs to be done in the house? This is broke. This is broke. Awesome. I'll have somebody out to fix those. Great. Sign this new lease. Boom, done. One of my best tenants has never moved. I bought the house in, I think, 2019, and he stayed there simply because when I cut down a bunch of trees on the property and cleaned up his landscaping so he can plant gardens and do his own thing. And he's like, Alex, this is unbelievable. I wanted to do the gardening forever. I'm like, oh, I'm going to paint the house too. What color do you want to paint it? I don't care what color it's painted. He picked a neutral color. I let him pick the front door color. It looks great. He's happy as a clam. There was a question in the chat. Let me pull this up.
Mia said, aside from experience, what resources did you use to educate yourself?
So a lot of people get into the bigger pocket stuff. There's podcasts that you can listen to. There's people you could follow on Instagram. There's a lot of stuff you can learn on that front. Mine was like mentors. So John Murphy was a good buddy of mine. He, when I bought my first property, it was a duplex. The inspection report was 100 pages long. You could look behind the foundation, sat staggered, and you could look behind the foundation from the front of the house and see into the crawl space. It had knob and tube electrical on the entire duplex, and the masonry was screwed up everywhere. And there were 2 massive trees hanging over the back of the house, hanging on the neighbor's house, all that stuff. And when I tried to bail after the inspection, he was like, do not bail, just don't bail. And I was like, I have no money to do this. And he was like, get through it. So I negotiated something with the seller. I got a credit on some stuff, and I just started investing. Every time I got a check, I put it back into the house. And I finally got out from underneath that constant check writing, but it taught me a ton of lessons about the maintenance of it, what things I would look for, and then how to identify things moving forward, and understanding the cost of things. So I know now that if I got to rewire a duplex, you can go from the basement and you could go from the ceiling, but you never get to the first floor. So you got to punch holes in the wall. So you're probably looking in the ballpark of $18,000 to $20,000 worth of electrical. Budget it in or don't buy it. Or run conduit on the outside of the wall to do it for a lot less. I did that last year. I had kids living in a duplex with original windows that were all painted shut. And she did not put that she had kids on the lease. This came as a surprise because I was a dummy. And I had knob and tube electrical everywhere. That sounds like a fire hazard to me. And it sounds like a lawsuit and a lot of sleepless nights. So I went through and I ran all conduit on the wall, capped in, up the ceiling. Looks not great. Guys, it's a rental property. It's new electrical. It's safe, it's to code, and it works. And there's no knob and tube.
Let me piggyback that just a little bit. So I only have 2 doors, and and we are relatively new investment property owners. But what I found to be true, just getting this thing up and running, is that we are, as agents, in inspection reports all day long. We tend to know ballpark numbers for things, and if we don't, we know the right people to ask. So I have applied that advice that I'm constantly giving my investor clients to my own situation. And I'm also constantly asking Alex, hey man, what would you do in this situation? And he almost always says the thing that I think is the right choice. So without getting into too much detail, I guess my answer to that question really is we are real estate professionals. It's pretty easy to apply what we do every day to this world, to this realm, and essentially use the advice you're giving your clients on yourself.
Yeah, that absolutely super important, right? If you think If you're going to buy a house that has issues with it and your client's going to do it, or you're going to negotiate those things on an inspection, but maybe you don't have the luxury on this multifamily or this investment deal because of what you're paying for it, budget it in. Or one thing I have down here, if there's like, so I just bought 805 Hamilton. You guys can look it up. It's a duplex with the middle wall, the kitchen taken out. And we're putting it back together and we're redoing it, and it looks like hell. I walked it with a contractor the first time, and I said, I'm not going to hold you to a price, but I need to know the budget. Are we 50,000, 100,000, 200,000? Is it way worse than I think? Or can you see things that I can't? That's the biggest project I'll ever do. But I brought them with, and they walked in and said, Alex, it's this much money. And I was like, oh, hell yeah, game on, because it's less than I thought. And then I made her write me a formal budget. I purchased the home, and now I can move forward with the plan that I initially had. But I would not have bought that if she wouldn't have gone with me, because she was able to write out the whole scope of the work and say, here's what your budget is. And I said, okay, I think I can make those numbers work. There is risk in this. That's the other side of the experience thing. You have to fail. My property on 49th Street, I've sunk so much money in it. It's been the worst investment I've ever had. I currently now get $3,400 a month on a $1,700 mortgage payment. So I'm out of the woods. Now I've sunk a ton of cash into it, but it's like, finally I can breathe to go, it's finally there. It will finally produce the income that I needed to produce, but I'm holding it for the long term. So my goal with that property would be, I still own that down the road. What I would tell you is, if you're buying for rental purposes, the only reason you should ever sell anything is to 1031 it into something else. And if you want a creative way to set aside money for your children, to say, instead of I'll sell this and give the money to them to pay for college, you should take the cash flow that you get from the property. You should put it into an investment account for your child when they get to college, and do it now. So if your kid's 10, you get 8 years to start. That will help pay for their college. Things like that. Don't sell because you pay too much tax on it.
Better than any 529 account out there.
Oh yeah. If you can keep these things forever, that's the magical key, because your tenant's paying your mortgage for you and additional money. So you get tax write-offs from improvements in the or maintenance and improvements in the property. You get depreciation, which we haven't even touched on yet and we won't get into, but you get that as a tax write-off. Your property taxes are a write-off, your insurance, like all these things, or your interest, all these things are write-offs for you against your income. Do not sell them. Hold on to them. Find a way to hold on to them. Treat them like you do your stock accounts. If you put money in your stock accounts, you put it there and you leave it. That's how you should treat these. We're a little over. I could talk about this stuff forever because it's been a huge catalyst in what's changed Maureen and I's life and been very helpful for us. So if anybody has questions or is like, hey, I have a client that's looking and you guys need help, just let me know. I'm always available to talk through it. But yeah, a lot of this is like, you got to get your teeth kicked in a couple times too. Just don't let it happen on your first deal, because then you'll never get back in. Anybody have anything else? Quiet crowd today. Thanks for jumping in, guys.